Let's talk some chess. It is July 4th, Independence Day in the United States, so I figured I'd talk about a game that's very prominent in American chess history and just chess history in general. This is Game 6 of the 1972 World Chess Championship, also known as the Match of the Century. It was played in Reykjavik, Iceland, and the two players, of course, are Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky. There's already been some drama in this match. So in round 2, Bobby Fischer, who we all know was a bit of a temperamental player, didn't show up to the game because he said the cameras were too close to the board. He demanded that the game be moved to a small offstage room or backstage room, like a ping pong room, and Spassky very nicely accepted. So Game 6, the drama is high, and Bobby's looking to sort of put his stamp on this match and send it into the annals of history. So Bobby opens us up with c4. We have e6 by Spassky, knight to f3 by Bobby, and here d5 by Spassky. So challenging this pawn on c4. And Bobby here goes d4, which transposes into the queen's gambit. You can see a pawn is being given away on c4 on the queen side. And this is pretty interesting. It adds to the historical sort of stature of this game. Bobby had never played the queen's gambit before, or at least that's sort of what the sites say. So maybe in some casual game he had played it, but not in high-level games like this. So what a time to try an opening or transpose to an opening that you've never played before. Spassky declines it. He goes knight to f6. We have knight to c3 by Bobby, bishop to e7, and bishop to g5, attacking this knight and getting sort of deep into Spassky's position. Spassky castles kingside. We have e3 by Bobby, now opening up a defense of the pawn on c4 from the bishop on f1. And now h6 by Spassky, forcing this bishop to make a decision. Do you want to capture? Do you want to retreat? And here Bobby wants to keep his bishop and wisely puts it on h4. Spassky obviously is not going to challenge it on g5 because that would just leave his kingside extremely open. So we have b6 by Spassky, perhaps preparing to get this bishop out, fianchetto, or even get it to a5. And now Bobby takes on d5. So c takes on d5, knight takes on d5. This opens up a discovered attack of the bishop and the queen on the bishop on h4. So Bobby has to do something about this, and he does. He captures the bishop on e7. We have queen takes on e7, knight takes on d5 with an attack on the queen. So pawn takes on d5. And now rook to c1, which is a very nice move. It puts the rook on a semi-open file. You now attack this c7 pawn, which is defended by the queen, but adding some pressure to Spassky's position. And now bishop to e6. Spassky finally has time to get this bishop out. A little bit of an awkward square for the bishop. It's sort of hemmed in on this side, but it does protect this important d5 pawn. And yeah, the engine is okay with this move, so I'm okay with this move. We have queen to a4 here by Bobby, and this is sort of the first departure from like the heavily recommended engine moves. The engine here wants you to play bishop to d3, getting the bishop out, controlling sort of these important squares. But instead, Bobby just kicks us right off with queen to a4. And I'm guessing it's because he sort of maybe did some preparation or anticipated Spassky's next move, which is c5. So very expansive move, opening up space on the queen side, but this allows Bobby to put his queen on a3, which pins the pawn to the undefended black queen on e7. So now you can't have pawn captures because then queen takes queen and the game is over. So this is going to be an important sort of pin on c5. You're going to see Bobby move all of his pieces sort of in concert around this pinned pawn and sort of work a better position because this pawn can't really do anything, can't move and deal with it. So we have rook to c8 by Spassky, adding protection to the pinned pawn, and now bishop to b5 by Bobby. So developing that bishop, which we saw the engine wanted to develop a bit earlier, but now this is totally fine. Here, Spassky makes sort of a mistake. He plays a6, which is a very unthreatening pawn move. So it looks like you're threatening to take the bishop, but of course you're not, and Bobby just completely ignores it and takes on c5. The reason this is unthreatening is because after pawn takes, you get queen takes rook, and you're up the exchange, and this is totally fine for Bobby. So this pawn is not really threatening to take this bishop, and a better move here would have been queen to b7, which actually leads to a slight positional advantage for Spassky. So after d takes on c5, we have rook takes on c5, getting the rook in control of this open file. Rook takes, pawn takes, and now this comes to the discovered attack of the queen on the bishop. After the white queen moves to b3 to protect the bishop, the king moves to f8, a nice prophylactic move, and Bobby castles kingside. And this is actually a better position for Spassky. d4 potentially is coming with a discovered attack on the queen. If the bishop moves away, then you get a queen trade, doubling up Bobby's pawns. So this is a nice position for Spassky. Unfortunately, he didn't find this queen to b7 move. yeah, this queen to b7 move. Instead, he plays the really unthreatening and sort of losing a tempo a6. So Bobby, of course, knows that the bishop can't be captured, and he just takes on c5. And again, just to note that this pawn was pinned, it's pinned twice now. The pawn can't move forward because the white queen takes the black queen, and the pawn can't capture on d4 because, once again, queen takes queen, but also rook takes rook on c8. So the pawn is pinned. The pawn is not captured. The pawn is pinned a couple of different ways, which is allowing Bobby to get his pieces into a good position. So we have d takes on c5, b takes on c5. Again, a pawn that is pinned two ways, queen on queen and rook on rook. So you have to be careful with this pawn. And here Bobby just castles kingside, getting his king to safety. We now have rook to a7, and still this, well, actually, sorry. Now this addresses the problem with the pawn on a6. So now Spassky is threatening to take the bishop, so if Bobby just plays a silly move, then you can play pawn takes bishop because the rook is protected by the queen, so you can't take with the white queen because then obviously the black queen just takes back. So Spassky now with this move is threatening to take the bishop on a7. Again, the better move here is queen to b7, which carries the same threat. Now you're threatening to take the bishop because you can't take the rook with the queen because then the queen would just take back. So this is the better move, but unfortunately for Spassky, he plays rook to a7, and now Bobby just retreats the bishop to e2. Obviously wants to save this bishop, and yeah, so just takes it off of the semi-open file. We have knight to d7 by Spassky, so getting his final minor piece into the game and adding some protection to this pawn, which is attacked twice and, again, pinned twice, although it's not really pinned to the queen anymore. Well, in this position, it's not pinned to the queen because if the pawn moves, then queen takes queen and rook takes queen back. But now, with the knight on d7, the pawn is pinned to the queen because queen takes queen, and you can't capture the queen back with the rook because the knight is blocking. So anyways, just adding some more protection to this pawn, which is pinned twice and wants to make sure that the position doesn't fall apart based on this pawn. But this allows Bobby to take advantage of the pin by playing knight to d4. And this is a very nice square for the knight. It comes with an attack of the light squared bishop on e6. And of course, like we've said, you cannot take because queen takes queen is good. Even better, it looks like, is rook takes on c8 with check, and now the position is falling apart for Spassky. So obviously you cannot take. Instead, Spassky plays queen to f8. Now you finally broken both pins with this move. For example, let's say Bobby plays h3, then pawn takes knight. Now if you take the queen, you can capture back with the rook. And if rook takes rook, then the queen can capture back. So now there's no more pins with the c5 pawn. This is a nice little queen to f8 move that sort of breaks both of the pins. But now, of course, Bobby sees this and sees that his knight is being threatened, so he takes on e6. Knight takes on e6. And Spassky takes back with the pawn. And this is a nice maneuver because now Bobby has removed an enemy bishop from the board for his knight, and as we'll see, the bishop is going to be much better in the sort of position that's developing than a knight. So a nice little sequence there by Bobby. We now have e4 by Bobby, and this is sort of Spassky's last chance. Here Spassky really goes for it and creates a passed pawn and tries to sort of break open the position with d4. But this was his last chance to sort of save the game and prevent this pawn from becoming the great all-American pawn by taking it on e4. And now it's not a great pawn structure. Bobby will be able to win. I didn't write this line out, but Bobby will be able to win this pawn back. But it's better than what happens. So Spassky plays d4, cementing this pawn, as we'll see in a couple of moves, as what's going to be the all-American pawn. So just keep an eye on that pawn on d4. We have f4 now by Bobby. So now that these two pawns are, not threatening these pawns from pushing forward, you have this very expansive f4 move. This opens up the chances for the rook, for the rook to get into the game. Obviously, the queen cannot take this pawn. I don't know what's going on with my arrows. The queen cannot take this pawn because the rook is defending. So just a very expansive move forward. And here we have queen to e7, sort of getting off the same line as this rook on f1. But now e5 by Bobby. And now this pawn is starting to become a nuisance. It's really cramping Spassky's position. It's controlling these important squares. And Spassky really has to start worrying about this. And he starts with rook to b8, putting the rook on a semi-open file and attacking this b2 pawn, which if the queen moves away, then the rook can take and, you know, threaten the bishop and get into sort of Bobby's position. So Bobby starts with bishop to c4, and this is sort of going to be the kind of killer square or the killer diagonal for this bishop. Now the bishop is lined up with the enemy king. It's attacking this pawn on e6, which is the only thing stopping these two pawns from marching forward. So this is going to be a very powerful piece as we sort of continue on at the position. And we have rook to h8 by Spassky getting out of the direct line of this bishop. And now Bobby plays the really beautiful, just sort of queen swipe to h3. He pushes it all the way to the other side of the board. And this is a nice move because it attacks the e6 pawn twice. So now you have to be careful about this pawn. It abandons the defense of b2, but Bobby doesn't really care about that. You know, the engine actually wants Spassky to take, but now this, you know, there's a lot of ideas here of taking the e6 pawn and sort of marching forward with his pieces. So instead, Spassky plays knight to f8, adding some protection to the e6 pawn because you really don't want that pawn to fall in the position. But now Bobby plays b3, and now there's no chances of rook takes on b2. There's no chances of counterplay, and this bishop is just cemented on c4 forever. There are no Spassky pawns that can take away this bishop and you know, kick it from the square, and now this is going to be a really difficult piece for Spassky to deal with. So he starts with a5, and this is sort of the first indication that we're going to get of a very funny sequence of moves. If you look at all of Spassky's pieces, none of them really can move. So there's a lot of them that, well, these two pawns legitimately cannot move. But you don't want to push this pawn to d3 because then queen or bishop captures, and that's good. You don't want to move these two pawns because they're protecting the king. You can't move this knight and this queen because they're protecting this e6 pawn, and it doesn't really achieve anything to move these two rooks. So Spassky now is really just in the business of finding pieces that he can move without like losing the position, and that starts with just a5. And now Bobby plays f5, which is, in contrast, a very productive move. It's pushing the pawn forward. It's, you know, getting into Spassky's position. It's attacking e6 once again. And here, Spassky really has no choice but to take on f5. So we have rook takes on f5, and now this is a really powerful rook. This rook and this queen are getting really close to the enemy king. Obviously, ideas of rook to f1 doubling up on the f file, and now things are starting to get hairy for Spassky. So he plays knight to h7, which is a very nice sort of defensive move, or seems like a nice defensive move. Now the knight maybe comes to g5. It's now guarding some important squares. Obviously, when you put your rook on f5, you're sort of eyeing f8 in the future, and now the knight and the queen and the rook are defending the square, so trying to hold down the fort, but Bobby doubles up on the f-file anyways. And now Spassky plays queen to d8, and sort of what we said before, none of these pieces really have anywhere to go. The knight can't move. These two pawns you don't want to move. You'll lose this pawn if you move it. You'll lose this pawn if you move it. So Spassky now just has to move his pieces back and forth and wait and see what Bobby's going to do. So queen to d8, not really achieving anything. I guess getting behind the passed pawn on d4, but you know, that's not really a threat because if the pawn moves to d3, then both the bishop and the queen are attacking d3, so you can capture back, so that's fine. And here Bobby plays g3, getting the queen, again, in contrast, a productive move, getting the queen lined up on g7 and preparing to expand with h4 on the king's side. So here we have rook to e7 by Spassky lining up with the pawn on e5. Again, very defensive, basically trying to stop the ceiling from falling in. It's not going to work. And here we have h4 by Bobby, preventing any ideas of knight to g5. So now the knight really and truly is cemented on h7 with nothing to do. We have rook b to b7, so doubling up on the all-important 7th rank, but now just e6 by Bobby, and now this pawn is truly the all-American pawn. It is protected by the bishop, so it can't be taken by the rook unless you want to lose the exchange, and it is just completely cramping Spassky's position. You can't do anything with these rooks, you can't do anything with the queen, you can't do anything with the knight. This pawn is just really ruining Spassky's day. And there's a lot of threats here, right? The two rooks are sort of eyeing f8. They want to deliver check. You know, the knight and the queen are protecting it for now, but just a very difficult position to deal with. And all the while, you have a queen sitting on a semi-open g-file. So just a lot of threats, and Spassky is just trying to hold them all up. But, you know, like the proverbial Atlas, unfortunately, unlike Atlas, it's not going to work, as we'll see. So we get rook b to c7 by Spassky. Again, nothing to do with these pieces, so just keeping them on the 7th rank. And now the aggressive queen to e5 by Bobby, getting the queen in a better position. You know, this comes with an attack on the c5 pawn, still attacking the g7 pawn, adding a defender to e6, so a very productive move. And now queen to e8. Again, just sort of moving the pieces around where they, you know, where nothing bad will happen. Here we have the very mean a4 by Bobby, so preventing the pawn on a5 from moving anymore. And now this is a completely solid structure. You can't take any of these pieces. I always love in endgames when I get something like this. So queen to d8 by Spassky. And you can just see the queen is just moving back and forth. And here we have rook 1 to f2 here, moving the rook up the board, queen back to e8, rook 1 to f3. I'm not sure why Bobby did like one move at a time here. I didn't look that up. Maybe he was just going for time control, or that probably was it actually, time control. So rook 1 to f2, rook 1 to f3, queen just goes back to d8. Again, the queen has nowhere to go, so it's just dancing between these two squares. And now bishop to d3 by Bobby. Now that the queen is on e5, protecting this pawn, the bishop can move away from c4 to d3 and sort of infiltrate into Spassky's camp on this this other long diagonal. So if the rook moves, then bishop is, you know, eyeing this knight, and this is just all falling apart here for Spassky. So queen to e8, again, the last couple moves have just been the queen moving back and forth. So not much is happening for Spassky. And now queen to e4 by Bobby, staying in defense of the e6 pawn, but setting up a wonderful battery of the queen and the bishop on the h7 square. And obviously you have to be very worried about this because this would be checkmate. You know, if we can see how this would be checkmate if it's not properly dealt with. So here Spassky plays knight to f6, trying anything. You put the knight here, you sort of jam up the rook, which has always been threatening to come to f8. With check, so you jam up the f file, but you're also guarding the h7 square. So, you know, maybe that's an idea. And most importantly, for the moment, you're attacking the queen on e4. So it seems like a very good defensive move. But here Bobby plays sort of the finishing touch to sort of cap the victory in game 6. So take a moment and see if you can find Bobby's move while I give you just a couple seconds. Okay, so Bobby just breaks open the position. He hasn't sacrificed anything yet this game, but now he does with rook takes on f6. And now the position, as we'll see, is just completely open. You have no choice here but to accept the sacrifice. Otherwise, you're just down a knight and you're being attacked. So you also have to accept the sacrifice because Bobby is threatening queen to h7 with checkmate. So the pawn takes, which opens up a defense of h7. But now Bobby plays rook takes on f6, and now there's just so much pressure from the rook, the queen, the bishop. And if you'll notice, the queen and the bishop are still guarding this all-American pawn on e6, so it can't be taken by Spassky's pieces. So again, you know, Bobby's down the exchange, but he got a knight and a pawn, and that was a really important pawn on g7. And it doesn't really matter because Bobby's bishop is really, really good. This is just as good as a rook and probably better. So it doesn't really matter that he's, you know, technically down the exchange. Here we have king to g8 running away from the threat on h7. So now, I don't know, there's really no moves in this position, so you can't blame Spassky. But now bishop to c4, lining back up with the king. And now if e7 is ever in play, this obviously will come with check. So the king moves back to h8, very sad. And now Bobby plays queen to f4. And in this position, Spassky resigned the game. And actually, I think it was in this position or after Spassky resigned that the crowd started applauding, which is not normal at these sorts of events. And Spassky, a very classy move, actually joined the applause with them. And I think you can see that in the pawn sacrifice movie, where the game's over and they're applauding and Spassky's applauding, and just a very nice show of sportsmanship by Spassky. So why is this move so threatening, and why do you have to resign after this? Well, you know, obviously you are threatening this h5 pawn. You're threatening a lot of things, but you're threatening the h5 pawn. You're also threatening rook to f8. So, you know, did I do another? No. Yeah, let's say you ignored both of those threats and just played something silly like h5, then the game is over almost immediately. You get rook to f8 check, the move that we've, you know, kind of seen being threatened sort of in this position. Now there's no knight on h7 to stop this. You have to take with the queen, and then queen takes, and now it's checkmate in just a couple of moves. The king only has one square to go to, which is h7. But now this wonderful bishop slides to d3, delivers a long-range checkmate, and all these other squares are taken away by the queen, and the game is over. So you can't ignore this threat. You can't ignore the threat of rook to f8 with checkmate to follow. So the only real way to defend it is queen to g8, which obviously blocks rook to f8 check. This is still good. Rook to f8 is still good. It obviously wins the queen, so that's still fine. But the better move here, is queen to e5, setting up a wonderful discovered attack behind the rook. So now wherever the rook moves, this will be check. Here, do I want to do this? Yeah. So here, you know, the only thing you can... Is there another move I wanted to show? No. Sorry, I'm getting all mixed up in the... No. Okay, let me do this. Yeah. So here, you know, you have to worry about this rook to h6 with double check. So, you know, if you make some silly move, then rook to h6 is checkmate because the queen and the rook are double checking the king, so the king has to move, and of course the king has nowhere to move. So to deal with this, you put the rook on h7, blocking on h6, but now you get the all-American pawn finishing the game with e7. And sorry, I should have asked, pause the video and asked you to find that move, but alas, I think it's a beautiful move. So let's talk about sort of what this move means. You know, obviously the pawn is one square away from queening. You've opened up a discovered attack to the bishop on the queen. And there are three things that you can really do in this position with the black pieces. The first thing you can do is ignore it. So, right, let's say you just move the rook to h7 and you ignore this pawn and you say, I'm just going to keep playing. Then it's checkmate in just a couple of moves. You get rook takes on h6, opening up a discovered check from the queen, which, you know, we've seen before. The only move here, there literally is only one move. It is queen to g7 blocking. You can't block with the rook on g7 because Bobby's rook is obviously pinning the rook to the king. So the queen blocks, but then you get the wonderful all-American pawn promoting to a queen on e8, and this is checkmate because both of these pieces, or I guess the queen, is pinned to the king by Bobby's other queen. So you can't ignore this threat. That's number one. Can you capture the pawn? Is that in the position? Is that okay? You obviously don't want to capture with the rook on h7 because of this rook to h6 threat. So what if you capture with the rook on c7? This doesn't work either, and it's probably an even more beautiful finish. You get rook to f8 with check, and again, this is a discovered check from the queen, and the rook is obviously on an amazing square. It's pinning the queen to the king, and you don't have many moves here. The best move, you know, if you don't want to just like totally jam up your position, the best move is rook to g7, or sorry, rook h to g7, but both, you know, neither work, as we'll see in a moment. But now you get rook takes queen on g8 with check. Only move that makes sense is... Sorry, the only move in the position is king to h7 because the bishop is protecting this rook on g8, so the king has to move to h7, and now you get queen to f7 with check, and now you're basically out of options. You have to block with the rook on g6, and now queen takes rook, and this is checkmate. So again, using this bishop to protect the rook on g8 so the king cannot escape and sort of is forced into h7 and checkmate. And again, you know, if you take with the, let's say you block with the rook on g7, then it's the exact same idea, but even prettier. You get rook takes on g8, and this already is checkmate because the bishop is protecting the rook, and the rook on g7 can't capture because it's pinned to the king by the queen. So you can't ignore the all-American pawn. You can't capture the all-American pawn. The only thing you can do, in fact, in this position, it's made in a couple of moves. You can delay the mate by just, you know, being the computer, playing like the computer and playing queen to g2 check. But after some silly checks, the game's going to be over. So king runs to h7, and now you get bishop to d3 check. Rook blocks, rook to f7 check. And now you finish the game by promoting your all-American pawn to a queen on e8, and this is just checkmate in so many ways. So a nice finish. But I think the most likely, of course, is capturing. is capturing this pawn, but obviously we saw how, you know, that leads to a wonderful checkmate with a discovered check. So anyways, hope you enjoyed that game. It's obviously an amazing game. It's crazy to see that type of game in a world championship. You know, Bobby just forcing Spassky, who himself is, I think, the reigning world champion, a wonderful player, forcing Spassky to just make some, you know, the last 10 moves of the game where Spassky just moving his pieces around with no purpose, and just creating this super powerful bishop and super powerful all-American pawn on e7. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Drop a like, drop a subscribe, and we'll see you next time.